Welcome to Standard 5E. In this presentation, we will try to describe the growth of European nations during the 15, 16, and 1700s economically, including something called the Commercial Revolution and an economic policy called mercantilism. This particular standards always seemed a little out of place to me. This really, if I were writing the standards, I would have placed at the end of Standard 4 with the rest of the Age of Exploration, but here we find it at the end of Standard 5, so we'll go ahead and see what's required by this standard. Okay, our essential question that we're looking to answer in this standard is what were the roles of this thing called the Commercial Revolution, which we'll take a look at, and this policy of mercantilism, and how did these two things help fuel the growth of European nations during this time? Some essential understanding to help us answer that question. We have to go back to the Age of Exploration and understand that competition that was going on between European maritime nations. By maritime nations, we're referring again to those countries located on or close to the sea or the ocean. For those of you who know Spanish, mar, again meaning the sea or the ocean. Countries like Spain, Portugal, England, and France, who were actively involved in the Age of Exploration as they went out looking for overseas markets and colonies and resources, it's going to require them to create new economic practices. One of these was a policy called mercantilism that we'll look at in a little more detail. And all of these ideas that we see in this presentation were meant to link the European nations that were out exploring with these newfound colonies. Okay, the purpose of the things that we see in this presentation was so that these European countries would be better connected to their newfound colonies. Okay, so the Commercial Revolution, this refers to the new economic practices that were developed by these European nations that were busy competing for overseas markets, colonies, and resources during this period of roughly 1500 to 1800. Commercial refers to business. Okay, in real estate, people looking for property, there's what are called residential realtors, people who sell houses and rent apartments and condos, and then there's commercial realtors if you're looking for a space to open up a business. So commercial referring to business, and revolutions are things that are changes. Okay, so we're really looking at the business change here. In ways we can try and picture in the future in your lifetimes, let's imagine that humans set up colonies on Venus and Mars and other planets. That would require humans to come up with new ways of trading, new ways of having money and commerce with those places. In many ways, in the 15, 16, 1700s, these faraway places in the Americas and Africa and Asia, they might as well have been other planets. So the European countries that were establishing these colonies, they were going to have to come up with new ways of doing business. And those things together are called the Commercial or Business Revolution. Okay, some of the things we need to know about the Commercial Revolution is that we're going to see new money and new banking systems develop during this time. Some of these examples include things like checks. If you keep in mind that during this time, gold and silver, pieces of metal, were money. Well, if you needed a large sum of money, that was a big amount of metal that you had to carry around with you, and especially now that these Europeans were going back and forth to North and South America, to Southern Africa, to Asia, especially on boats out on the water, heavy metal probably isn't the thing you want with you the most. So the idea that you can fill in numbers on a piece of paper and that piece of paper be worth and recognized as being worth that amount of money when you get to your destination, that was a big deal. Those of you who've ever sold candy bars or done fundraisers at school, you appreciate checks, being able to bring these little pieces of paper for sometimes very big sums of money instead of having to carry that as cash, or back then carry that as metal. So checks were one example of the commercial revolution. Insurance. Okay, some things, those of you getting ready to drive probably know a little bit about the idea that there were companies now that were willing to insure the money and the goods that were going back and forth. These were business ventures. There's a lot of valuable products on these boats crisscrossing the oceans going from the Americas back to Europe, for example. There was a lot of time and money invested in these voyages, and so when these boats sank or got shipwrecked or got captured by pirates, that was lost money. Okay, and just the same as car insurance today protects people against accidents and the economic and health problems that those things can cause, the insurance policies here guaranteed the value of these boats and the products traveling back and forth across the oceans. Another thing that develops during this time are stocks. We'll see more about stocks when we get to the Great Depression later on in Standard 11, but stocks are kind of a simple way of thinking of stocks is they're educated bets on the future of a business or a company. These were ways for businesses to raise money today by offering people a chance to get in today on what they hoped would be some future profit later on. Okay, so stocks developed during this time as well. So these are just some examples, checks, insurance, stocks, of the new money and banking systems that develop during this time. Okay, we also see that these colonial economies, the economies that develop in these newfound places in the Americas, they were very much limited by the economic needs of the mother country back in Europe. In other words, the colonies we can think of as the kids. And the kids, we can almost think of maybe a parent who insists that a kid become an athlete. Okay, and the parent spends a lot of time and money training the kid to become an athlete, or a dancer, or an actor, or a musician. But they're really kind of driving the kid in the direction that they want them to go. England, France, Spain, Portugal, they were the parents. Virginia, Mexico, Brazil, these were the kids. Okay, and we see the effect of that even today. We see here in the advertisement, one of the things England wanted from Virginia was tobacco. Okay, the early settlements at Jamestown, the settlers grew tobacco to ship back to England where it was in high demand. Well, even today, 400 years later, tobacco is still one of the main products, and probably one of the biggest agricultural products still grown in Virginia. 400 years later, the former colony still kind of does what the mother country set on course to do. We see here a picture showing mining in the Andes region of South America. Well, even today, a lot of people are employed in that region of South America in mines and mining. Likewise, some Caribbean islands like Haiti, they were initially set up for growing sugar on big sugar plantations. The mother country expected the colony to produce sugar. Again, hundreds of years later, sugar production is still a big industry in many of those islands in the Caribbean. So the colonial economies and now the independent countries that have grown out of those colonies, they were very much shaped by the mother country and what the mother country needed from them 300-400 years ago. Okay, and then our last piece of our standard here is this economic system or economic policy called mercantilism. Economic systems are things like capitalism, communism, socialism. They're ways of organizing and running an economy. Mercantilism is a system that doesn't really exist too much in the world today. But during this time period that we're looking at, it was the dominant economic system in colonial Europe. Okay, so mercantilism, to go a little more in depth, it was an economic system or an economic practice, and its whole goal for these European countries that adopted it was to become self-sufficient. That's what they wanted to become. And to be self-sufficient means to not need anyone or anything outside of themselves, become independent. In our map here we can see India was a colony of England for hundreds of years. And the whole reason why India was a colony for England was to provide England with things that it didn't have back in England, to provide natural resources and other raw materials so that England could then turn those products into the things that it didn't have itself. Okay, so in other words, by having India as a colony, England as a country could not have to rely on its neighbors, France and Spain and Portugal, and its other competition. Okay, this idea of mercantilism was very much based on colonies. The idea here was that colonies existed for the benefit of their mother country. We see in this political cartoon, the woman seated at the table is the mother country. England, France, Spain, Portugal, and the three girls standing there, standing next to the table with colony on their apron. We could picture them as being Virginia and Mexico and Brazil, and we see them serving the mother country gold and silver, food and raw materials, the things that the mother country expected from their colonies. We see here in the diagram the colonizing country or the mother country received raw materials from the colony, and in exchange the colonizing country or the mother country sent manufactured goods back to the colony. Okay, we can see that in an example here to wrap up our standard. Let's imagine a situation where Spain only made shoes and Portugal made socks. And people in Spain were getting blisters on their feet because without socks, the shoes were rubbing up against their feet. In our world today, Spain would simply take some of its money, they would send their money to Portugal, and Portugal in return would send socks to Spain. Seems normal to us today. In a mercantilist world, though, they wanted to keep all the money in their country. Spain doesn't want to do business with Portugal or any other country. Instead, Spain says the reason we're not making socks is because we don't have the cotton to make it. So Spain's going to go out and find a colony, a piece of land that does have cotton. The colony supplies the cotton to Spain, and Spain, wanting to be self-sufficient, then makes its own socks. And so hopefully that example explains this concept of mercantilism. That pretty much wraps up what we need to know for Standard 5E.